Hello and welcome to Just Films and That. This is the podcast that celebrates films we reckon might be underrated, underappreciated, or we just really, really wanted to talk about them. I'm your host for this week, Alice Oliver. With me, as always, is Josh Hallam, and it was his turn to pick the film this week, so he went with American Psycho from the year 2000. So let's get to it. So then, Josh, you picked American Psycho, as I've already stated, which is from the year 2000, so spoilers, listeners, if you haven't seen it yet. So go on, Josh, tell us, what is the film about and why?
There probably will be spoilers, won't there? Let's be honest, I
hope
based
so.
on the film.
In an insignificant analysis of a film, it would be dumb to try and avoid spoilers, let's be real. Yes.
Christian Bale plays a yuppie in the 80s called Patrick Bateman. He is American. And you know what else he is? Yeah, that's it. No, so it's basically Patrick Bateman is a sort of a all-American yuppie type in the 80s, living a life of hedonism, drugs and alcohol and working out and sex and booze and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, he also has an unquenchable thirst for murder and for killing people. And the film sort of charts his fall into mania and his relationship with violence and stuff like that, and whether or not, shall we say, that is even happening. So that's what it's about. It's based deep. It's deep, that, isn't it? Yeah,
mysterious,
it's philosophical, and it's based on Bret Easton Ellis's book, who has written other things like Rules of Attraction. A lot of people will know of Bret Easton Ellis. And to be honest, this is probably one of those films that a lot of people might say, why are you picking that? Because they don't think it's underrated or underseen. So I'm really nervous to hear your thoughts on this one, because I think this film is pretty flawless.
Okay.
Right? I think it's incredible. It's definitely in my top films, probably in my top 10.
Wowzers.
Maybe even my top 5. The reason I picked it, it's probably not underseen. It might have been underseen at the time if you look at the box office, but since it came out, it has become quite a cult film. It has lots of people seem to have seen it. It's often referenced in things like social media when people are joking about it and stuff like that. So I don't think it's underseen. But I was watching it for my own pleasure, which sometimes when you have the time when you're doing this podcast, Alice, you do that. You watch a film without having
films
to...
for pleasure. God,
for
forget
fun,
what that's like, you know?
Remember films for fun?
OMG.
So I was watching it and I looked at the score and I was really sort of taken aback by particularly one of the scores, which we'll come on to. So I'm picking it because I think it's underrated. Now, you might disagree with me, but we'll get stuck into that in a minute. But I think this film is pretty flawless. Having said that, just because I love it doesn't mean you do. So I'm nervous to hear what you say, because this could be one of those episodes where one of us tramples all over the other person's beloved film.
They're quite enjoyable as well, let's be honest.
And I was like, you know everything you love, you idiot.
Yeah.
So now I know from what you've said recently, because again, sometimes we might talk. I know, surprise for people at home, but we might
only
occasionally...
sometimes, because we don't like to give away too much about what we're thinking and what we're feeling.
So it's like, what you having
films.
for tea? I'm not telling you that'll give away a film choice.
Yeah, I can't tell you. Can't tell you.
Faber beds and about fava beans, Faber eggs. What are they?
Fava beans. That sounds delicious.
Fava beans and a bottle of Chianti. Anyway,
sounds about right.
So I know you've been on a little bit of a Bale binge.
I'm always on a Bale binge.
Yeah.
Always.
Gareth, Christian. All the Bales.
Hey, don't forget the hey.
I'm very... I'm excited and nervous. Had you seen this before? And what did you think generally as an overall?
So this is one of those films that I had seen before, but I could barely recall it, couldn't remember what I thought of it. It was one of these where, like, back in the day, I used to watch a lot of films and just not really pay attention, or I'd doze off halfway through, all this kind of nonsense. I don't do that anymore. Like, when I watch films, I'm really in the room and I really do pay attention. So this was one that I knew I'd seen it, but I just couldn't remember it well enough to give any sort of analysis
any opinion on it at all.
Yeah, I didn't feel anything towards it. So I was really keen to watch it again. Like you say, it has been memed to death. Like, you see it everywhere, sort of thing. So some of the images and the scenes and the look of it kind of felt familiar. So as far as I was concerned, I hadn't truly seen it before, even though I'd been in its presence when it was being shown or whatever. But I really, really loved it. I thought it was really, really good. Really loved it.
How good compared to other films I've picked that you've liked?
Like up there. Like up there. We're thinking True Lies, we're thinking Reign Over Me, Pride. Like we're up there.
Yeah, Rocky Balboa. Yeah, all the ones that I've picked that you liked. Yeah.
Sure.
So that's good, right? So I made it with that. So I mean we can finish it here. Let me hear it then. What did you like?
So I really just kind of love the whole vibe of the thing. Like it all feels a bit surreal and bizarre and a bit wacky, but it's all obviously set in the real world and kind of with these familiar locations and settings with familiar scenarios. You know those scenarios.
When you find yourself in a
scenario. No one feels like a real person. Like the dialogue doesn't feel natural, and then all of this kind of works together to make the whole film just feel uncanny. Like the whole thing feels uncanny, and I thought that there was a real skill in that to create this feeling of unease throughout the whole thing. But then with it also being like quite funny at the same time. Which I thought was really interesting. So you've probably seen this recently then, or you're at least seen it enough that it feels like super familiar.
So I still watched it again for this.
Yeah.
But I think of all the films we have done, this is one I could have done without watching it again.
Yeah, yeah.
But I still watched it again because I owe it to the guys at home.
Well, absolutely. And, you're in a different mindset when you're watching it for analysis than when you're just watching it for entertainment, aren't you? So what was this like for you then? Was it as good? Was it better with the analysis?
I still loved it. Loved it. It's funny, just go back to what you said on there. I think that's one of the things when we come on to the critical reception that people do misunderstand, and I think still misunderstand about this film, which is that it's very, very stylized and it uses genre a lot in terms of signifiers and what it's trying to do to make you feel things as the audience. So it's not a horror, but it has elements of horror. If it's anything, it's a dark comedy.
Yeah, interesting.
But I don't think people think that it is.
Right.
And I think that might be one of the problems, is that people think it's a sort of it's a horror mixed with a sort of maybe a political take on the time or whatever. So yeah, just to pick on what you're saying there, that's where I think that is. I think that might be one of the reasons which comes with the critical reception. But no, I watched it again, and yeah, I mean, I just loved it. So I could talk a lot about this film. I mean, we could easily have done a 2-parter about this or a special or anything, but I'll try and boil it down so that it's not too long. So what I've got here is a few things. First of all, the performances. So let's talk about Christian Bale, because
let's do it.
I think he gives one of the best performances I think he's ever given in his career in this film, but also one of the best performances I've probably actually seen. I mean, there are a lot of amazing performances. There are a lot of performances which we've talked about which you think get a lot of credit and you're like, I don't really understand why, or performances that don't get the credit that you think do. So this is one of them. For me. So I think Christian Bale deserves a lot of plaudits for this. And he does get a lot of plaudits for this, but I don't think he did at the time. So I think he's incredible because there's so much on his shoulders. I think he's in every scene. He's pretty much in every scene. And he has so much to do in terms of his physicality. Because obviously, Christian Bale is famed for changing his body shape for films, right? And this is exactly like that. Just, obviously he's in incredible shape in this film, but that is part of the character. It's not like it's not a vanity thing. He didn't look like that anyway. I'm sure as an actor, he probably keeps himself in good nick. But I'm fairly certain he himself has come out and said that he found this really difficult to get in shape for or whatever at the time. I bet,
yeah, because he's incredibly lean because you can see the bones in his shoulders, but very ripped at the same time.
Yeah.
So you hear a lot about the kind of crazy shit that they've got to do to look like that, but you imagine there's a lot of dehydrating yourself, probably not eating for the 48 hours before shooting.
No sugar, no
crazy
carbs.
Shit like that. Yeah.
And he does, he looks amazing, but obviously the character's meant to look amazing. So that's one of the things, is it really goes with the character, because this character is an entirely self-consumed, self-obsessed entity, and to the point where there's a whole scene dedicated to it. There's a whole scene to his welfare routine, not his welfare routine, his skincare, what he does to exercise, his showers, his how he looks and all that sort of stuff. Not only his physicality, but his emoting too. He has a lot to do. He is funny in this film. I think he is. I think he's very, very funny.
Has he ever been funny before? Have we ever seen Bale being funny?
There's elements of it in some of the films. Like if you think about the Nolan Batmans, particularly the first one and the second one, he does have those little quips,
bit quippy
when he's talking with Michael Caine's Alfred and stuff like that. But you do associate Christian Bale with a more intense,
Terminator Salvation,
or even
thing,
your things like that he's running off for, like The Fighter, or even earlier things like The Machinist and stuff like this. So he is brilliant in this. Everything is on him, and I think he's captivating. Like, you can't take your eyes off him. When he's funny, he's being funny. When he's scary, he's quite scary. When he's, this idea that I think he almost disappears into this entirely narcissistic person. And I'd also, at this point in his career, I'd love to have seen this when it came out, because at this point in his career, he wasn't a big movie star.
No, he played Thomas in Pocahontas, and then that's pretty much
all I know. He was in Empire of the Sun. He was in Newsies or Newbies or whatever the musical's called, and like you say, he's in Pocahontas. So he wasn't a household name, or he certainly wasn't the household name that he is now. So I'd love to have seen it and thought what people thought, because at the same time, there's a very famous sort of sliding doors moment with this film, which is it was supposed to be Leo DiCaprio.
Okay, yeah.
And there was a lot of chopping and changing. The director wanted Christian Bale and the studio wanted DiCaprio. And I think they said something like, well, if it's Bale, you can have this much budget. And if it's DiCaprio, you can have this much budget. And she was very much like, don't care, want Bale. And that will happen. Good. It's not to say Leo couldn't have done it. But,
no, he's great, lovely.
But I think it's, it probably would have been a different prospect, because if you imagine this came out in 2000, that's post-Titanic.
Yeah, so Leo is the heartthrob of the time, isn't he? Yeah.
What was it? Was it Leo Mania or something they called it at the time?
Yeah,
something like that, wasn't it? So he was huge. He was the Beatles. You know what I mean? He was whatever. So Christian Bale is amazing, and I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that, which I'll ask you about in a moment. But I also want to give a little shout out to the supporting cast as well, because you've got loads of good people in there, like Josh Lucas, Chloe Sevigny, Justin Theroux. Reese Witherspoon pops up in it for a bit. But the two highlights I think in this are Willem Dafoe, who's only got about 3 scenes.
He's good, isn't he? Yeah, he's good.
And Cara Seymour, who is not very well known, but she plays, well, she doesn't actually have a name, but he calls her Christy. She's one of the girls that he takes back to his room. And I thought she was incredible in it. And I've only seen her in 1 or 2 things before. Was she in You've Got Mail? Was she Tom Hanks's sister-in-law or auntie?
Oh, interesting.
Mother-in-law or something.
Interesting.
But the only other thing
because the family dynamics in that film are so messed up.
The only other thing I've seen her in is Gangs of New York, right? And she's not even in that much. So I've seen her in a few bits. And I think she's brilliant in this. She has a lot to do. And I think she's fantastic. So I just wanted to give her a little shout out. So tell me what you thought about the performances then. Particularly, obviously, Christian Bale.
I mean, you've said a lot of it there, but yeah, he is everything, isn't he? He is just brilliant in this, just absolutely excellent. He's so relentlessly intense, and like he uses his face a lot to convey the feelings and the attitudes of the character, as well as his line delivery as well, which is excellent. And there are times where he got so manic and so wound up that he started reminding me of Jim Carrey. Like when Jim Carrey's doing his big comedy performances, and like even his voice started to sound a bit like Jim at times, which was crazy. He has these moments like where he starts talking about things at length. It's usually music, and then it sounds like things that Patrick has like written and learned and recited to try and sound like a normal person, because he obviously doesn't have many authentic or normal things that he can talk about, because the things he wants to say will make him sound like a fucking psychopath. He's also just got like a couple of little moments to help convey the character is, like when he lunges to put a coaster on the table before someone can put their cup down or whatever it is. Like it's all the little things, like the little intensities within him, excuse me, how quickly his face can change. Like he can go from smiling to scowling so quickly, and like the whole mood of a scene will just change. And that happened a lot, obviously, especially when he had people in his apartment where, bad things are going to happen here, and the mood just changes just because of him. Like the lighting, the setting, everything stays the same, but he fills the whole room himself.
He changes his face when characters in the film aren't looking at him.
Yeah.
So when characters are looking at him, he's sort of putting on the performance of the Bateman yuppie. When characters aren't looking at him, he's got like a vacant stare.
Yeah.
It's that complete and utter apathy.
Yeah.
Like almost
the smiles as well. Like when he smiles or laughs, like it's so, because he's not dead behind the eyes, but like it's it's like his smile and his eyes don't match.
It's
like he's smiling. It's like, I'm friendly, I'm happy, don't be scared of me. But his eyes are saying the exact fucking opposite of that. And there's just such a great talent in that.
It's that idea, isn't it, that he wants to fit in. So the superficialness of Patrick Bateman is actually put on. So he is superficially superficial. Because he's trying to be a yuppie, but he isn't. So it's that idea that he is actually... Christian Bale is playing Patrick Bateman, who is playing Patrick Bateman.
Yeah.
And I think that's captured. So that there's a bit, isn't there, where Willem Dafoe walks into his office and he is pretending to be on the phone.
Yeah, it's so funny. I love all that. He does it a few times, doesn't he? These fake phone calls.
And he's like, but in that bit, his performance of being on the phone is bad. Because it's clear he's not on the phone. He's like, okay, John, right. Like that, and it's obvious he's not on the phone. So
don't wear that colour. No, you don't want to wear that colour.
Yeah.
You want to wear this colour.
Exactly. And that again, that brings me on, I suppose, a little bit to the direction as well. So I do think this is very, very well directed. It's obviously very centered around Bateman as a character. It's really well paced. I think it's a pretty tight hour and a half. I love things like the use of violence. So obviously this is an 18 rated film. I think it's probably that or that equivalent around the world. But actually, when you watch it again, you don't see that much of the violence. A lot of the violence is implied. Even when he does stuff to people or he shows him doing stuff to people, you don't see him doing it. So, for example, he drops a chainsaw off a set of stairs to kill somebody. You don't see the chainsaw hit the person. You just see him drop it and then see the result. So a lot of the violence is implied. So again, something I noticed that I never noticed before is there's a very famous scene where he has a threesome with two girls. And then when they're in bed together, he gets up and he goes in his drawer and you don't really know what he's doing. And he just says, we're not finished yet. And then the next sort of cut is him paying them as they leave his apartment. But as they leave, they've got black eyes. And I'd never noticed that before.
Oh, really? Interesting.
So obviously what it's implying there is that the next bit of the session or whatever was him being violent to them and then paying them. And obviously it shows them not being able to wait to get out the apartment. And then later on, he uses one of them again. And she says, I had to go to the hospital after last time because of blah, blah, blah. And I'd never noticed that before. I just assumed that it was, because he was a brute or whatever, like in the last bit. So I like the use of violence. And then that informs for me the use of genre and stuff like that, because it is the darkest of dark comedies. It is so dark in terms of the subject matter. You can't get... I think if you tried to go any darker than this, you'd be straying into the unacceptable. Which I suppose you could look at this and say it isn't acceptable, but I don't think it is, because I think of what it is parodying. And also the way it does it, because there's also that element of if it is or isn't true, which we might come on to in a little while. But I love the parody of the yuppie culture. So, for example, the very famous business card scene.
Oh, yeah.
That's
so funny.
Where they all give a shit about business cards that all look interchangeably the same. They're all just white business cards. And stuff like that. So I love that. And that, for me, is how you know it's a dark comedy. Because why would that be a serious scene? Stuff like that. I love the little details of description about how superficial he is and stuff like that. So I've tried to read the book. And I got about a third of the way through, because it is like, it's all description. It is just, he goes around his apartment and he names like everything and how much it was and what the brand was and what he could have spent and what he didn't spend and all that sort of stuff. And obviously that's different, because in a book it's trying to build a world in a different way, whereas in this they can do a lot more showing and not telling because of the media and stuff like that. So I love that. I love the descent into his mania as well. So that idea that he starts and he's so sort of well presented, and by the end of the film he's a little bit sort of like a haggard version of what he was and stuff like that. So I love that. But anyway, what else did you like about it then?
So I liked sort of the parts that I'd seen kind of memed or gifted to death actually coming to life and sort of getting some context for them. So obviously there's the part where he's just walking through the corridor at work with his headphones on, but he's listening to Walking on Sunshine. And like, you don't get that from the gif. Yeah, no. because the mood that he's creating around him, again, doesn't match the song at all. So that's another moment of comedy there, and his whole sort of relationship to music as well. And the business card scene bit, like you say there, it's just such a brilliant piece of cinema. Like, it's so well written and just so well executed, and tells you so much that you need to know about him. And there's so much of this going on throughout the film where they use moments to show you what kind of person he is. You don't have to sort of bash us over the head with exposition or other people talking about him or whatever. It's all about his actions and his looks and the kind of menacing kind of feel that you get in his eyes and stuff. Really enjoyed that. And just the final few things as well. So I think the soundtrack is great because it's very upbeat and playful. So it's a wonderful juxtaposition between that and the story. I appreciate that Patrick's kitchen looks a lot like a morgue because everything is stainless steel. So I enjoyed that bit of detail. The bit of narration at the beginning, you touched on it before, but where he's describing his morning routine sounds exactly like a modern day influencer talking on Instagram these days.
Here's everything I eat in the day.
Exactly. Like, I use this moisturizer, then I use this face mask. And I love that because it makes it still so relevant today.
Yeah, it does
and
feel very relevant.
More relevant today.
That's I'd never thought about that, but you are right. That you could take the 80s thing out of it. And if you made it again today and made him an Instagram influencer, it'd still be the same.
Exactly. So it transcends the years for sure. The only thing that dates it is the mobile phones.
Yeah, so the size of bricks, I suppose. Yeah, yeah. No, I know what you mean. For the most
part, I was like, this could be today. Like, absolutely, people are like this. And it's not another one of those psycho, but you know,
it's another one of those films that's set in the 80s, but it's not like it does go heavy on the 80s, but that's entirely a choice because it's obviously a big part of the message and the sort of parody of, if you like, of that sort of Reagan yuppie era of America. The point is all the music, like you say, you know, he listens to like Whitney Houston and Huey Lewis in the News and Genesis and all that sort of stuff. And for each one, he seems to do this big monologue. So no, I completely agree. And I'd never thought about that before. That's a really good point. Like if you made it now, it'd still be relevant.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like you could keep the script exactly the same and I think it would still work. I like that the ending is unclear, that it's kind of ambiguous and you don't actually know what's fully gone on because you are left wanting more, which is obviously quite an interesting thing for a film to do. It isn't wrapped up nicely and ends sort of, you know, with a proper conclusion. And then just finally as well, just one of my favourite quotes, maybe of any film that was just used over and over again in this, I've got to return some videotapes. Every time he has to leave a room, I've got to return some videotapes. I just loved it. It was so like, start innocuous and
it's probably that's probably one of the only pieces of script that would date it.
Yeah.
It's because what would it be now? It'd have to be I have to cancel a trial period on a streaming service.
Yeah, gotta get back and cancel Disney Plus. We'll move on now then to talking about anything that we didn't like about the film, or perhaps anything that we would change. So, Josh, is there anything? Probably not.
Originally, when I was making notes, I think I put I refuse. Like I thought perhaps once a year or so we could pick a film where one of us goes as a treat. I refuse to say anything bad about this film.
I will not.
But I'm committed to
the format.
So one of the things is I have heard people have issues with the ending. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of ambiguity about the ending, I know. Mm-hmm. But and one of my very closest friends, one of my best friends, said that he liked the film, but he hated the ending. He felt like it rendered it all pointless. So that's not something I feel. That's not something I feel, as we may have touched on. But so if I had one thing to say, I was trying to find something, and I put here, perhaps it's killing me to say it, but perhaps the use of genre is almost too subtle, so people don't understand it as a dark comedy.
Okay.
Which might explain the reception when we come on to it, but perhaps it's that. Perhaps it's almost too subtle. You know, in the way some comedies are almost too subtle that people don't understand that they're not, that they're a comedy.
Right.
I wonder if this is that. So there's a little bit of horror and a little bit of parody and a little bit of comedy and a little bit of other stuff.
Okay.
And it's almost too subtle to get a laugh or whatever. Mm. I'm not sure I think that, but I can understand that not everyone is, not everyone watches films with the same enthusiasm. Some people, when they watch a film, just want to switch off. And if a film isn't sort of speaking to them at a level that requires less effort, that's not to say you should put effort in. Do you know what I mean? That maybe you think, I don't really get it. I've gone on record before to say there are some acclaimed directors that I don't like their films because I feel like there's something that I just can't quite click with. Mm-hmm. And perhaps this is one for people. Perhaps they can't click with that use of genre, or perhaps they need to like their character like a Patrick Bateman. Because I've sort of, again, on this podcast, I've said many times, I often have to like my lead character, but I absolutely don't in this scenario. So this is a rare example where I think, no, I dislike the lead character because obviously he's horrendous. Even if what happens at the ending or not is real or isn't, he's still horrendous because he's, you know, even the way he treats like his fiance or whatever. So I can see how people might think that. What about you? Is there anything you didn't like? Because you've been pretty positive.
So no major offenders, really. Overall, I just thought it was amazing and I really enjoyed it. But I will say that I feel like I noticed an inconsistency with Patrick's character, with the psychopath, funnily enough. But it is that he uses a sunbed, right? So in his opening sequence, obviously, he's taking us through his routine, and so much of it is focused on the health of his skin and looking young. But obviously, tanning is going to damage your skin and make you age prematurely. Yeah. So the thing I will say about that is that later on in the film, someone does comment on his tan and says, "Oh, you've got a great tan," and he's like, "Oh yeah, I use the sunbeds." So it could be that he's like feeling the pressure in that because he thinks people find him more attractive to look at with a tan, that's why he does it. But it's completely in opposition with his obsession with staying young and keeping his skin as sort of, but saying that, obviously he does drink and he does do drugs as well, and those things are going to age you pretty rapidly also. So maybe it's just like finding the balance for him, like, oh yeah, I work out this hard and I concentrate this much on my skin health so I can use the sunbed and then I can do some cocaine or whatever it might be.
Maybe it's a necessary evil.
Yeah, so he's got the look,
to be evil.
He's got the tan. But yeah, I thought that was interesting because it's the first thing anyone who cares about their skin health, like that's the first thing. It's like wear sun cream. You've got to wear sun cream every day. The sun wants to kill you.
I have never used a sunbed. I've never used any sort of tanning.
I'm ginger. That would be fucking suicide.
Apart from a literal sunbed, i.e. by a pool on holiday. I've never used a tanning bed or whatever.
No.
When did it become known that they damaged your skin?
Oh, good point, because he's in the 80s.
Has it always been known that they damage your skin? Because obviously, if you think, and I'm trying to think of other films that show sunbeds, the only one I can think of is The Full Monty, which is 98 or 97. And in that, they're really keen to use Tom Wilkinson's sunbed, aren't they? And that's 10 years after this film is set, obviously 3 years before this film is made. But so that's an interesting one because perhaps they didn't know, but at the same time, I don't know. I'm not a dermatologist. But yeah,
shocking.
But I suppose that's still a really good point, though.
So just a very, very quick Google search suggests that it wasn't until the late 90s that we really discovered the connection between sun damage and what that actually does to your skin. So yes, interesting. He may not have known, but I'm sure if he knew now, he would not be on the sunbed.
I wonder if you could make a film of him now. Like, would he still, like, if you think he'd still be around? He'd be in his, so he says he's 27 or something, does he? Say so that means he would, let's say, as a round number, he's born in 1960.
He may have died of the stress.
Yeah, so he'd be 60.
He's clearly very stressed.
63 nearly now.
Maybe after having the break and having that whole delirium about what happened, he turned a corner. And he got himself a therapist and went to a retreat, and maybe he's a whole new person.
He does show up in other books. So Bret Easton Ellis, he's got a brother in the book. So there's a book called Rules of Attraction, and I believe in the book it is Patrick Bateman's little brother. So he shows up in that, but obviously he just shows up as his brother. He's not. Whereas this is all in his head. That's in his brother's head, so you don't get to see what he's thinking. Because I believe they made a film of Rules of Attraction. They were trying to get Christian Bale to be in it, and I think it just didn't come off for whatever reason. Yeah, but yeah, so that's interesting. Was there anything else you didn't like, or is that pretty much it?
Just the other thing to note is that sometimes the voiceover or the narration or inner monologue, whatever you want to call it, did feel a little bit off and a little bit unnatural. So it wasn't awful, but there were just the odd time where I didn't really feel like we needed it. But as I've said before on this podcast for other films we've done, it's always obviously so challenging to adapt a book for the screen, and it's just a safe technique to ensure that your audience are where they need to be and that they have the information that they need to know all about the characters. So I can forgive it, but I just noticed it. Like sometimes I don't need it as much. I trust the action. I trust the performances. I can see what's happening. I don't need him I don't need his inner monologue to tell me what's happening. I can see it, sort of thing. But no, not a massive offender. And that was pretty much it, to be honest. We'll move on now then to talking about the critical reception. So, Josh, you say that you picked this because you think it's underrated, which is very, very interesting. So, me personally, this is easily an 8. Like, easy into the 8s, mid 8, maybe a slightly higher 8. I thought it was great. I thought it was a great 8.
Great 8.
You think it's underrated? So maybe it probably didn't get like devastatingly low, but low for this, maybe a high 6.
Okay.
So maybe I'll say it got a 68 or a 6.8.
Okay, as an average.
Yeah.
Okay. So but before I tell you this, because I think this is for me, I think this is a 9 out of 10.
Wow.
But I accept that I like it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I defy anyone to see how this is less than an 8 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
I just think I do think it's objectively a really well made film.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get, again, everyone has their opinions. That this whole podcast is based around that, but I defy anyone to not find at least one thing they like in this film, even if it's just Christian Bale's performance. Anyway, so this is why I think it's underrated.
Okay.
At the time of recording on IMDb, it gets 7.6 out of 10.
Okay, yeah, all right.
So not too bad, not too bad. But then we head over to Rotten Tomatoes, Alice.
Oh, yeah.
And this is where my blood's boiling, Alice. It's boiling. It's bubbling over. The audience. I like the audience. Look,
they're listening right now.
They're good. They're good guys. I've met a lot of them.
Good guys.
No, to be fair, the audience give it 85%. Right?
Okay.
And I think that's fair. I think it's Bob on that.
That's
Bob
good.
on. I might suggest that's a little bit underrated, but I'll take that. I'll take 85%. However, the critics, Alice, on Rotten Tomatoes give it 68%. That's just, I feel like that must be then. I think if people are doing retrospective pieces on this, it's not a 68%. This became quite a big cult hit. In the land of cult films, this is definitely one that got a following. So that averages out then to 76%. Okay. So you were bob on with your critic score, but that wasn't the average. So the audience brings it up to 76% or 7.6.
Okay.
I think that's underrated.
I definitely do think that's underrated. It's not as bad as it could have been. I'm glad it's not lower than that for sure. No. But yeah, that is underrated. I think this is better than that. Like it's just such a brilliantly executed film. It's good. If you like films, guys, this is a film and it is good. Definitely underrated, I reckon.
Well, there we go. Another underrated film in the back. I'm relieved, to be honest. I'm so relieved. I thought, because you just think every now and then, sometimes it just hits you wrong. And you think,
definitely that.
You can come away and go, nah, not for me.
Listen, I'm easy and I'm basic. If Bale's on screen, it's starting on a high. Do you know what I mean? It would have taken a lot to bring that down, but it started, it was good, and it just got better and better and better.
Anyway, so another one in the underrated, in the well-deserved underrated pile. So get in touch and let us know what you think about Un-American Psycho, but I think many people listening to this will agree. We will be back with another film in your ears next week, so keep a lookout on the socials, and we'll be announcing that near to the time. In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with us, the email address is filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. We're all the social medias. If you just search for Just Films and That on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, you'll find us. We're always putting stuff out there. So give us a follow, engage with us, drop us a DM if you've got an idea for a film. We're always open to suggestions, guys. So thank you very much for that. We're on Patreon as well. So if you're looking for a little bit of extra content, extended episodes a day or so early, then head on over to there. And any support you can give us is massively appreciated. And we are also on the television, aren't we, Alice?
We are indeed. Every Friday from 6 p.m, you can find us on the local TV network. So if you live in Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, Liverpool, or the northeast of England, you can find us on Channel 7 on Freeview. Or if you live in North Wales or South Wales, you can find us on Channel 8 on Freeview. I've also been uploading all the videos to Dailymotion. So if you head over there and type in Just Films and That, you can see what we're all about. And that's every Friday from 6 p.m. on the local TV network. Thank you.
Yes, lots of ways to see us, hear us, follow us, and all that jazz. But as ever, thank you very much for listening. Your support does really mean a lot to us, and we will be back next week with another episode. It's goodbye from me. Cheerio!
Bye!
Do you like Huey Lewis and the News?